Hi, I'm Elaine. Once again, I'm the brand strategy director of RADII. We are a platform that focuses on showcasing China's young people's creativity and culture to the rest of the world. And so, as I just said, I'm going to be using English today because we go international, baby. So not only do we focus on things like art, what young people are photographing, what young people are making music on, what young people are watching, we also focus on what young people eat. And so the title of my lecture today is What's on Young China's Plate? It is both metaphorical and physical. But to start things off, I guess I should actually define young China for you all. China, I think everyone knows here that China has gone through this unprecedented pace of change in the last couple of years. And so unlike the rest of the world, which has the designators of millennial and Gen Z and baby boomers, China's generations are actually denoted in 10-year marks, like decades. And so if you were born in the 70s, you're called the 70后, the post-70s. If you're born in the 80s like me, you're the 80后, and then the 90后. And so what is the difference between some of these designations that would be under the entire umbrella of millennial in the West? Well, 70后people, first of all, had siblings. The single child policy in China didn't actually start being enacted until 1979. They grew up where their parents were still part of a danwei, which is basically like a work unit. So their parents are used to having the government or the local people basically designate what their work is. And because of that, their openness to change is in this area that we call like curious but very cautious. They're very interested in new things that have come over from internationally, but they still rely on the kind of what they knew from their childhood. The 80后, they're called the Little Emperors, and they're called the Little Emperors because they are almost all single children. They were raised by 4 grandparents, 2 parents, so 6 people raising a child at once. They grew up in an era where private enterprise started to take over instead of state-owned enterprises, and so employment was no longer guaranteed, but also you got a lot more choice in what your employment was. And they saw this kind of like just skyrocketing of China's openness to the rest of the world. And so they were introduced to a lot. They tend to care a lot about experiencing new things. So now we get to the 90后, which is who I'm going to be talking about mostly here. And there are 188 million of them now here in China. They just did the census about a month ago, so we know the exact number. But you might be thinking, well, has China really changed that much so that 90后are that different than 80后? Aren't 90后just basically 80后but more? Well, I posit that it's not quite, and I'm going to dig a little deeper into what this 90后mindset is, because there are 3 things that we found that are specific to how 90后experience the world. And it's these 3. So first of all, China's position in global influence. And for all of us who were around here in the Hu Jintao era, which is not that long ago, you might remember that back then, China was actually still scared to call itself a world power. In fact, it very much said on the global stage that we're still a developing nation. And even in the beginning years of the Xi era, they were still very, very adamant that, we're just learning, we're just here to hang out, make friends, so on and so forth. That's changed in the last 5 years. China is now very, very solidly on the global stage. It's heading up the WHO. It's up in the UN, in the Peace Security Council, making demands. And that changes the mentality of the people living here. The second thing that's changed up is the complete makeup of the community. So up until 2011, there were still more people in rural areas of China than in urban. In 2011, that switched. So now more people live in cities than in any other part of China. At the same time, in 2018, the middle class hit the 50% mark. And that is an enormous amount of both wealth and urbanization. Basically, what that means is that the 90后that you meet today are migrants. Everyone's a migrant in China. A lot of people are growing up in places where they don't originally have roots. And finally, what they're competing against has completely changed. And so 8 to 9 million people graduate every year into the job market here in China. The Gen Z, the 90后, are the most educated out of China, but also around 15% of the population in general has a college degree now. And that's huge. That's led to a very, very different change in what kind of work people expect and what kind of work they're competing for. In fact, there's this term that's been going around recently called involution, 内权, to describe the feelings of the 90后. And involution is this anthropological term that basically means that things are getting more complex while not giving added benefit. And so a lot of these 90后are graduating into a market where the wages are rising, but they're not rising as quickly as everything else is getting more complex. In fact, one of the interesting stats I found was that here in Beijing and Shanghai, the average housing price is about 15 times that what average person can earn. In comparison, San Francisco is just 9 times. New York is just 4 times. And I grew up in New York, so I was shocked by that. I always thought New York was the most expensive city in the world. Apparently not. So what that makes is a generation that is the most confident and demanding of their place in the stage in the world, the most urban and progressive, because usually with a rise in incomes also comes more openness towards ideals of, say, marriage and LGBTQ issues and so on and so forth, and also the most stressed out. So what does that turn into then? We see these 3 things accelerating several food trends, and I'm just going to take you through them now. The first food trend of which is actually, I'm going to start with something light and fun. Local foods are being celebrated. I mean, look at Feast Festival today, right? You go down there, you're going to get a chance to try Yunnan food, you're going to get a chance to try Guizhou food. Definitely recommend those. But this is something that we are seeing across the entire country, this celebration of local food culture. And part of this is, obviously in the last year, part of it has been because young people can't go anywhere else in the world, so they've definitely turned inwards a little bit. But even in 2019, we saw domestic tourism rising, and specifically food tourism. This is also partially due to some excellent food documentaries that I think you guys should check out. Bite of China, Shunde specifically has left such a deep impression that Shunde is one of the biggest tourist locations in China right now for food. And 93.14% of the tourists that were visiting these domestic places said that they wanted to visit local night markets. Now, if you remember here in Shanghai about 5 years ago, there was this initiative to take markets off the menu, right? Reverse now because of these guys. They do want it to be authentic and tasty, though, and they are not afraid to say when they don't like something. I mostly put this up because it made me laugh a little bit. DT Caijing, which is this Alibaba-backed data platform, did a survey of where young Chinese people didn't want to go, and they felt that Beijing and Hangzhou specifically were food deserts. They found the food there mediocre, predictable, and heavily commercialized. Peking duck just doesn't impress like it used to, I guess. Another thing that you'll notice is a lot of nostalgia. Nostalgia marketing, especially nostalgia food marketing for China's quote-unquote time-honored brands. Time-honored brands are brands that have been around since the 1950s. There's like a set of criteria. I won't go too deep into it, but you will find a whole lot of recent interesting food collaborations going on. So there's Wang Wang, which is a snack company partnering with Nayuki. You have crazy-ass things like Rio, the alcohol brand, partnering with Liushen, which is an insect repellent, to create insect repellent flavored alcohol. You have Qingdao partnering with Karl Lagerfeld. Actually, Karl Lagerfeld has partnered with a whole bunch of random brands. I don't know why. I guess it must be lucrative in some way. And White Rabbit, the candy, partnering with just about everybody. In fact, if I wanted to go into White Rabbit collaborations, I could probably make the entire speech on that. No. I will say, though, that all of these collaborations are happening, but they're not happening by accident. It is both an initiative of the Chinese governments and an initiative of several big e-commerce platforms, JD.com, Alibaba, to push these time-honored brands forward. So they're kind of riding a wave that was already happening, but they are like, tornadoing that wave forward. Is that a lot of mixed metaphors? Anyways, Tmall, for instance, in 2018 had their Guochao initiative, which helped Chinese brands actually reach international fashion weeks. And then in 2019, Alibaba had their 新国化计划, which was specifically to help 52 time-honored brands get onto the e-commerce market, and they reached over 100 million of sales that year. So, why is that? Well, it's because China Pride is big energy now. The 90后are the most, quote-unquote, patriotic out of all the generations here in China right now. 76.2% consider themselves reasonably optimistic to very optimistic about the future here in China. And, this year has definitely helped that along. 6.5% told Tencent that they felt that China was at its historical best. Now, 6.5% doesn't sound that much, but then the second question down, which was like a more reasonable, China's not perfect, but always improving, garnered 73% of respondents. So what you see here is this sudden pride in what China can produce and this belief that what China produces is actually of high quality. So keyword searches for Chinese brands, they've surged from 38% 10 years ago to 70% now. And local brands in general have seen sales growth skyrocket. These are sales figures from 2019, the last normal year we had. And it was 15% sales increase for any local brand versus 9% for the average of international brands. I mean, 9% growth is still great for any brand. I do want to point out here, though, because several international media have seen these trends happen and have been a little bit scaremongery about it. For instance, The Economist recently had an entire issue about whether or not this nationalism of the 90后means something towards the rest of the world. Actually, the 90后, despite being incredibly nationalistic, are also incredibly loving of international stuff. In fact, they are also the generation that cares the most about the rest of the world. 53%, even after Trump, still view the USA favorably, compared to the 37% of 80后, like my compatriots. Maybe they just don't know better. So, is that why they're so into traditional Chinese medicine? Because here's another trend that you'll probably see a lot of. Chinese traditional medicine making its way into everything. Torrentang, which is this TCM house that's had 500 years of history, recently released a whole bunch of TCM lattes that you can get, featuring goji berries, longan dates, rose and hawthorn. Papacoa, which is this cough medicine that's, I think, especially popular in the South, has made its way into candies and bubble tea. Again, flavor combos that I'm not super into, but 90后seem to be. And there's cocktail bars around China. We've highlighted Herbal specifically, who are mixing traditional herbs into their drinks so that you can start curing your hangover while you're getting one. Again, the pandemic has definitely caused TCM interest to skyrocket, but even before that, we were already seeing this unprecedented rise in interest in TCM. And this interest is being shockingly driven by the 90后. Right now, it's estimated that the TCM market size is about to double in 2024 from what it was back in 2017. Well, yes, the big China energy plays into that, but also just generally this trending towards caring about what's healthy. And so healthy and light eating are terms that have gotten incredibly popular in recent years. Meal replacement options, so like energy bars, shakes, things like that, to boost nutrition or help you lose weight. That market has doubled in just 2 years from 2018 to 2020. In 2018, China became the largest health supplements market in Asia, and post-90s are driving this, 90后are driving this. They are the majority of people searching for meal replacements and health supplements on Baidu. So why? It's because of two terms that everyone should know. One is 烹可养生, punk health, and the other is 996. 996 work culture. So 996 work culture refers to working from 9 a.m. to 9 p.m. 6 days a week. It was championed by Jack Ma and the tech industry in general, and basically is not super healthy. In fact, Jiu Ling-ho and Li Ling-ho tend to sleep the least out of every generation here in China. 80% of them report being told to work overtime in their jobs, and that has led, and because they're working overtime, they also do something called revenge entertainment. 报复性的, various anything, 看电视, shopping, so on and so forth. That's basically where whatever free time they do have, they spend it not sleeping and doing things to entertain themselves. And so, they sleep like 6 hours a night. That has led to a whole bunch of problems. In fact, Shanghai Daily found that in 2018, 99% of office workers had some sort of abnormal physical examination result. This can be anything from like an ulcer to high blood pressure to depression and anxiety. So they are using TCM and healthy eating to combat this with this punk health aesthetic ideal. Hey, is that why they're also going veg? If you haven't noticed today, if you go down to the Feast Festival, there's a lot of really nice-looking veg options. And in fact, yes, China is going more vegetarian, which is shocking everybody. Basically, the market for plant-based meat is expected to grow between 20 to 25% annually, according to the Global Food Institute. And China's vegan market is now the fastest growing in the world. So yes, they care about being healthy, and they also care very much about being eco-friendly. In fact, Jiu Ling-ho are just around the world. Gen Z people around the world care a lot about social issues, but specifically in China, they care about the environment. In America, it tends to be more like social identity and the politics surrounding that. But here, about 25% of Gen Zers in China, and I'm using Gen Zers because it's the international term for it, are more concerned about environmentally friendly consumption. In China, Jiu Ling-ho have the highest understanding of what sustainable consumption is. And probably because they grew up in like the heady days before the era started to look this nice, pollution and food safety are still a very big concern to them. So yes, eco-friendliness is also part of the whole vegetarian thing, but also just the premiumization of experiences in general. Because Jiu Ling-ho want interesting, individualized, and noticeably high quality experiences. So lower tier city residents, so Beijing and Shanghai count as first tier, you have Suzhou as a second tier, and then everyone below that are still more willing to pay a premium on goods that they think are high quality than any global counterpart, Europe, America, whatever. And the stuff that they're particularly looking for are unique, fear of missing out FOMO items. So like brand collaborations, like Alexander Wang and McDonald's. They're looking for top quality, fast-moving consumer goods. So for instance, Wuchang Dami is the royalty of rice, the ermei of rice. And it's so popular now that there's become this market of fake Wuchang Dami online where more Wuchang Dami is being sold through Tmall than is being produced in China. So, But they're really into smart premium deals, which is why you see the proliferation of so many kind of group buying apps like Pinduoduo or VIP Shop, because trying to feed your Wuchang Dami habit can get pretty expensive, but they also are really, really into sexy impulse buys. So they're the most likely to actually walk by something and be like, oh, that looks pretty nice. I'll grab one. And that's because this is another very big generational difference. They are YOLO on money. YOLO is you only live once. Sorry, mom and dad, teaching you some slang in the meantime. They are the #1 spenders in their generation in the world. China accounts, so Gen Z household spend here is 13% compared to just 4% in the United States. And this is because of their whole idea of themselves. They now call themselves the 月亮族, the Moonlight Clan. And that refers to a lunar cycle and the fact that they are going to spend their entire paycheck in that one lunar cycle. So it's kind of funny because this generation is probably the richest out of any generation in China, but they're the generation that's living paycheck to paycheck because they're spending it all. In fact, even if they don't have the money to spend, they're getting into debt. And this is incredibly different from what it used to be, because if you looked at like an economist report from 10 years ago, they would say that the worst thing for China in terms of how much it can actually grow is that Chinese people like to save. Not anymore. But then this leads to another trend that we've seen. They are spending a lot. They are spending a lot on themselves for solo experiences. In fact, during this year's Lunar New Year, this year's, not last year when everyone was in the middle of the pandemic, this year's Lunar New Year, single portion takeout orders, for instance, hot pot, doubled. According to Tmall, the growth of food consumption in single person portions, so like buying a 500-gram bag of rice instead of like a 3-kilo one, has increased 30% from 2020 to 2021. And their inclination to dine socially or spend a lot of time out dining has actually declined a little bit, compared to other generations. Once again, a very little bit, but it's an interesting trend downwards, especially considering how important dining socially has been to Chinese culture so far. And that's because they know they're going to be forever alone. In fact, the Jiaoling generation is the generation that's definitely not getting married and having children. China recorded both its lowest marriage rate and childbirth rate in nearly 2 decades. They have reported being socially anxious. So a survey by 1010, which is a dating app, so take it with a grain of salt, but I swear it's backed up by other research too, found that 40.2% reported having trouble socializing or feeling socially anxious in group situations. In fact, all they seem to want to do is own a pet and go travel, usually alone or with one friend. So yeah, premium pet food spending is also up, because also give that YOLO life to your pet, And so that really concludes my talk. The Jiaoling generation is all big China energy. They're super proud of China. They are super punk healthy because they're working the rest of the time. They are unscared of spending, meaning they don't care about spending money, and it's just for one person. Yeah, that's me.